Okay, so violence against children was until recently an under-researched area. So during my 8-week placement at the Home Office, I was fortunate enough to undertake quantitative analysis around this topic. The aim of the analysis was to understand what characteristics are predictors of violence, and in order to do this, I used the Crime Survey of England and Wales. This is a national, self-reported questionnaire which explores the extent of crime in the UK. My focus was children, so I used the child questionnaire aimed at 10 to 15-year-olds. The dataset contained over 900 variables, so I undertook a basic study of the variables to choose my ones for the study. This revealed statistics such as how many males were victims of violence. This was 64.5%. Or how many of those that had tried cannabis were also victims of violence. This was 23%. Once my variables were chosen, I split them into 3 categories. Personal characteristics, which included age and gender, lifestyle characteristics, which included drugs and alcohol use, and environmental factors, which included parental income and adult supervision. This was in order to keep my analysis clear, but it's also important from a policy perspective. If, for example, my results revealed that lifestyle factors were the strongest predictors of violence, then we need to implement interventions to help prevent children from choosing these lifestyles. If, however, my results revealed that personal factors were the most important characteristics of violence, then we need to be doing more to protect those individuals that are experiencing violence. I undertook a variety of statistical analysis, which is a little bit too complex to explain right now, but my results revealed that being male, aged between 10 and 12, having a disability, drinking alcohol and being cyberbullied were the strongest predictors of violence. In fact, being cyberbullied made you 5.5 times more likely to experience violence. This was probably one of the most fascinating and exciting moments of my placement. With a finding like this, we can implement policy which can help stop those that are being cyberbullied from also experiencing violence. In addition, those that had a disability, it was associated with an 80% increase in violence. Why are we letting children that are already at a disadvantage be further victimised through violence? My findings can help prevent this. Whilst with the Home Office, I was able to take this analysis further and look into child sexual offences. Unfortunately, I'm not able to disclose my results, but these revealed even more shocking and interesting findings which I wish I was able to share. What I will leave you with today is that whilst my analysis may have seemed small and irrelevant, findings like this could help lead to a national framework which could help put a stop to child violence. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Jackie. My name is Jeanmiguel, and last summer I interned at Ipsos Mori. During my time there, we work in a public study called Generations, which is basically a study that looks at how generational attitudes change across time in Britain. I'm just going to show you 2 of the variables I analysed because of time, of course. First one is people that identify themselves as low income, and I think this is very interesting because it is really susceptible to economic factors, external economic factors. So in the 80s, when economic growth was happening, you can see that people were not looking themselves as poor as they used to be. On Black Wednesday in 1993, this goes up, and same happens in 2008. But what I really want to point out here is the generational differences. So, for example, we have pre-war generation consistently look at themselves as being poorer than the rest of society, when in reality, pre-war generation is actually richer on average than the average Briton. And then we have millennials, for example, people like us, who, in comparison to Generation X, for example, started the trend poorer than Generation X, and it has taken a while of going down. So we can see that the self-perceptions that people have, the millennials have about themselves, is actually not very good. When we look at the second point we were looking at is negative attitudes towards homosexuality. And this is very interesting because we can see in the 70s and the 80s how it goes up across in relation to the AIDS epidemic. But in the 90s and the 2000s goes down a bit in relation to more acceptance and treatment. The point I want to make out here is how liberal we are as a society. And we tend to think, or at least I believe so, that we're very open and liberal and tolerant. But when we have, for example, 20% of millennials, who are supposed to be the most progressive, open generation of all, saying that being gay is wrong, and 40% on average between Generation X and baby boomers, I think it's important to really reconsider this point and figure out if we are really as tolerant and liberal as we think we are. But of course, I mean, there are limitations in studying generations, and this graph proves so. So it's important not only to look at age and time changes, but also other variables that may be able to influence this. So for example, issues related to religion, income, geography, age, are of course really, really important to understand why, for example, 20% of millennials think being gay is always wrong. Another point I want to make out here is that it is really important in future research to focus in the differences between how we perceive ourselves and how we actually objectively are. And again, this is a very good point that we can show with graph number 1. But I think it's important that we in the future can, and in future research can input this input in order to improve our generational understanding. Thank you.
People are living longer nowadays. You hear about the unprecedented lifespan all the time. You read it in your newspaper, on your smartphone, or on your television. Perhaps we've just heard of it so much and come to accept it with a kind of complacency, and even assume that we may all share similar lifespan in later life. In fact, in multicultural societies like the UK, a lot of ethnic minority people have worse health than a white majority. So, but then we know very little about our often taken for granted ethnic minority health among the older population. So as an ethnic minority myself, and also driven by my intellectual curiosity, I've taken one step further to investigate if the ethnic health inequality gets worse in later life, and if these patterns are changing over time, with my mentor Dharmi at Center on Dynamics of Ethnicity this summer. So in my project, I've analysed 4 national surveys. They are the 4th National Survey for Ethnic Minorities 1994, the Health Survey for AIM 1999 2004, and also Understanding Societies 2009 Wave 1. So using white people as my reference group and also self-rated health as a measure of people's health, I developed a binary logistic regression model on a statistics software to explore these patterns. And I've also included gender, people who are older than 45 years old, ethnicity, and household income as my explanatory variables. So I found that older people in general are experiencing health disadvantage, and especially for ethnic minorities, they have particularly worse health than the white majority, especially for Bangladeshi and Pakistani groups. But for Chinese people and Irish people, they seem to have slightly better health in general. And if we take a close look at the Indian groups and also the Caribbean groups, those people seem to have better health over time from 1994 to 2009. So then I would say the general findings we've got in here can support the view that ethnic health inequality deteriorates with increase in age. So aging is not a piece of cake. Obviously, we have a lot to think about underlying these issues. It could be gender inequalities, it could be socioeconomic factors, or even people's accessibility to health services to bring along these findings. And I hope my sharing today can spark your interest to think about what we can do to undo this finding, and imagine how the world would be different if we put more intellectual effort into the field of aging. Thank you.
Right, so yes, my name's Jim. I was at New Economy, and whilst I was there, I was handed a lovely data set which basically shows moves from one borough to another borough within the UK. And I was told, basically, go, find out what's going on so we can have a rough idea of what's happening in Greater Manchester with domestic migration. So I think my findings are really interesting because I think they provide a new lens for looking at the 10 boroughs, and I think they reinforce certain characteristics which we already knew. So firstly, and what surprised us, is GM appears to be quite an insular borough. So you see the grey line is moves from the home borough, and the grey line is who's coming in. So the grey line, is Greater Manchester. So 42% of moves coming into Greater Manchester are from somewhere else in Greater Manchester. So there's a lot of circling around the different boroughs. So don't worry, we're not all going to have Cockney accents by 2040. They're not going to be eating barn cakes in Edinburgh or anything like that. And on top of that, 20% of moves are somewhere else within the northwest. So generally, it's only about 30% of people moving around that are actually coming from somewhere outside of the northwest region. Secondly, there are stark variations between the boroughs. As you can see, Manchester way up in front, but it is a bit bigger. But also, Manchester is much more adept at getting southerners in. So 20% of moves into Manchester are from a southern borough, compared to 10% for the rest of the boroughs. So Manchester's got a much bigger connection with the south than the rest. Also, our northern boroughs of Bolton, Bury, Oldham, Rochdale, Tameside and Wigan, they account for 52% of the population of Greater Manchester, yet only attract a third of migrants. There's another disparity there. And thirdly, we have our friends in Wigan. Now, they, for some reason or other, don't feel quite as Greater Mancunian as the rest of us, as Wigan is the only place where you're more likely to move to or come from the northwest than somewhere else in Greater Manchester. So that's another interesting disparity. And thirdly, and this is the thing that people were really kind of thinking about in the office, is what is going on with London? Are we being swamped by Londoners? Are we all going to London? And I think the best way to express it is, in 2015 at least, we had quite a cyclical migration pattern. So the difference between ingoing and outgoing of London migrants was only 56 people, so that's not even the amount of people in this room. However, as you can see from the graph down there, the bars are very different, so we're losing a lot of people in their 20s. However, they're starting to come back in their 30s and above, and very interestingly, they're bringing their kids with them. So, thank you. That was domestic migration in Greater Manchester in almost 2.5 minutes. So, thank you.
Right, hello everyone. I'm really honored to stand here today to present my findings within the internship experience. And I think that my findings were actually in a more practical sense, because the main aim was to find out how to optimize marketing and pricing strategies based on analyzing customer behaviors and discovering the booking trends for the pantomimes. Yeah, so like pantomime actors. Yeah, for the pantomimes from 2013 to 2015. And then one effective methodology that I designed on my own is to find out whether the booking trend, whether customers are booking earlier or later for pantomimes over the past 3 years. And in order to do that, there were 3 main steps. And the first one is that I collated the data, relevant data, as the early booking sales date from the customer relationship management system, so that all of the data could be put into Excel and then do the initial data cleaning. And then second is to identify the time intervals. For this, I set up a benchmark date so that every other date could be compared with that benchmark date in order to create their own intervals. And there were 6 intervals here, which is 0 to 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks to 1 month earlier, 1 to 3 months earlier, 3 months to 6 months earlier, 6 months to 1 year earlier, and then 1 year earlier. So it's 6 intervals. And then finally, we do the data visualization, which produces the graph on the screen. And the results were actually, there was an overall declining trend for people booking in the earlier stage. And then this indicates that people are tending to book later for pantomime shows over the past 3 years as time evolves. So one potential reason with my further research is that there were quite a lot of competition going on, and then people are more likely to compare and find better options through the advancement of social media and online ticket sales platforms. So in this case, I made a recommendation for the theatre to release cheaper tickets at the very early stage of the ticket release, and then also probably make the best use of social media and data analytics tools in the future, so as to identify more trends and then secure more customers. I find my internship experience really rewarding, because that is one way that I could use my data analysis skills and put them into practice to make a positive influence on a real business. And then I also think that because data analytics has already entered into the cultural heritage sector and is quite a rare case in the past. So I definitely think that data literacy is the new black, and that and then the data will definitely be used in more and more in this digitalized world. That's my presentation. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
A famous detective once said that it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. So this was a philosophy I learned from Q-Step. I interned in a housing association called Affinity Sutton, and my main task was to evaluate how geotagging can provide the company a new set of data that will help them make sound investment decisions. Now, for those of you who don't know what geotagging is, in simple terms, geotagging is pretty much the process of collecting geographical coordinates of various objects and things that you think are essential to your research goal. Furthermore, in the beginning of my internship, I can't go through full detail on this, but I found out that geotagging can help the Housing Association understand two main housing issues. One, antisocial activities, and two, repairs. However, I thought experts from the association probably knew these things already, so I decided to do some more research, but this time it was field work to the estate, and I had the chance to speak with residents and caretakers who lived there. And I found out that there was this one complaint that simply everyone I spoke to had in common, which is the lack of sense of belonging. Now, this intrigued me, and even the Ron Jackman, the caretaker of the estate, even advised me to look into it. So I did, and I looked further into it, and I did some more research, and I came across this theory called the natural territorial reinforcement theory, which pretty much argues that if you want to improve the resident's sense of belonging to an estate, you must improve the estate's sense of privacy. And you can do that by emphasizing the perimeters of the estate, whether naturally planting trees all around the estate, or even artificially building a massive wall around the estate. So from this theory, I went back to look at the estate, and I thought that the estate didn't look private at all. So I started comparing the coordinates of trees with the coordinates of antisocial activities committed inside the estate. And I found out that there was, in fact, a correlation. For every block, in fact, that has fewer trees surrounding the estate, there was a higher frequency of antisocial activities. Thus, that was my conclusion of my last finding, and at the end, I presented my 3 findings to the company at the end of my internship. Yes, Q-Step aimed to develop my skills in handling quantitative data. However, there was something else important I learned from my internship, which is the importance of qualitative data. Now, from the qualitative information I gained from speaking to people, residents, and doing some of my own personal research, I managed not only to answer the why questions on why these correlations existed in the first place, but I also managed to discover new sets of quantitative data that helped me, that was unique to the company, thus improving the impact of my findings. So, to clarify Sherlock Holmes' quote on data, it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has both quantitative and qualitative data. Thank you.
So, now we get to talk about sex. Well, kinda. Let me explain. My objective was to provide some background to a wider project investigating how sexuality impacts on health outcomes for heterosexual couples in a 50-plus age bracket. I specifically investigated if attitudes impacted upon frequency, concerns, or satisfaction, and if there was any partner influence. My work focused on 13 attitude statements with 5 responses ranging from strongly agreed, strongly disagree, factored into 4 continuous attitude variables. The attitudes were permissiveness, such as homosexuality is wrong, conventionality, such as men have a higher sex drive, feeling pressured, there's too much sex on TV, and sex is beneficial. These were recoded into 3 categories, agree, disagree, or neutral, which were tested against clusters of questions that focused on frequency, satisfaction, and concerns. This presentation is a snapshot of the work I carried out, focusing on overall concern against permissiveness, conventionality, and benefits for women only, as there were some interesting associations there. So, preliminary descriptives show show women are generally younger, less permissive, and more likely to agree sex is beneficial than men. Conventionality increases with age, more so for women, but both men and women get less permissive and more conventional with age, whilst the beneficial variable doesn't really vary that much. Now, figures 1, 2, and 3 on the slide show how her level of overall concern varies between couples with convergent and divergent attitudes. And we can see how the majority of women are not at all concerned about their sex lives. That said, figures 1 and 2 show within couples, If he, she, or both are not permissive, she is significantly less likely to be overall concerned with her sex life. Also, if he, she, or both are unconventional, she is significantly more likely to be overall concerned. So, is there a possible partner influence there? The picture is more complex in figure 3, but overall for women from couples where neither agree sex is beneficial are least likely to be concerned. Now, I controlled for health class and age for women only to begin with, and there still seems to be a significant association. So women, you can see in table 1, women get slightly more concerned the more permissive they are, or unconventional, but less concerned the more they agree sex is not beneficial. But once male demographics and attitudes are controlled for, female overall concern remains associated with her attitudes read benefits. But now his demographics are significant, whilst her attitudes read conventionality and permissiveness are not. As a large proportion of women have male partners that are older than them, therefore more conventional and less permissive, his age is perhaps more significant than her attitudes, raising some important questions, I think, for gender equality. Thank you.
I was the political research intern at YouGov. I started on June the 27th, literally a few days after the EU referendum result. And as a politics student, I felt I was particularly in the right place. As it came in, BBC News and Sky News are playing on various screens throughout the office, and they've even got a slide, as you can see up there. So, post-Brexit, the British political world was going into meltdown. We voted to leave, currency markets went into freefall, the Prime Minister resigned. That didn't even make it to the front page on some papers. Labour MPs resigned in protest to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Farage was declaring Independence Day, which is ironic given that a lot of countries' Independence Day is them gaining independence from Britain. More Labour MPs resigned. Conservative MPs put themselves forward for leadership. More Labour MPs resigned. Nigel Farage resigns as UKIP leader. Eventually, Labour MPs launched a leadership challenge against Jeremy Corbyn. Boris Johnson, his face there, gets stabbed in the back by Michael Gove and decides not to stand for Tory leader. And finally, Theresa May becomes Prime Minister after watching all the Conservative candidates essentially fight among themselves. So the work at YouGov itself, it has a massive panel of over 400,000 participants. My work there was primarily working on the company's daily poll, so that was lots of different polling each day. For example, we looked at consumer confidence post-Brexit. I looked at specific polling of political parties. Oftentimes this rapidly became redundant as people were dropping in and out of the race on a daily basis. I did long-term demographic data, so I gathered information on voters in the Greater Manchester area, and that will soon be used for the mayoral election, which is coming in a few months or so. The team also introduced me to the DEFCON Gove scale, which is depending on how much work there is to do in the office. You've got a pretty happy Gove, and as it goes up, it gets progressively serious. The computer software I primarily used were Griffin, SPSS, and Excel. You guys will probably know the latter two. My ultimate outcomes was I was able to contribute my own data-driven article to the official website. That was on the topic of the England football manager, although I don't actually watch football, but that was the topic they gave me. I was tasked with being the editor for John Humphrey's article. He's a BBC broadcaster and political commentator. However, there weren't any errors, so I didn't actually need to edit anything, but that stays with us. Finally, the team let me use my own questions to add to the daily poll, and I did this on the topic of human rights, because that's what I tend to do my dissertation on. And a couple of little interesting statistics to leave you with. 59% of the public say they would order a nuclear strike, and if it were put to a referendum, then the public would bring back the death penalty. Take from that what you will.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for listening to this short presentation. My Q-Step internship was at the Planning Support Office in the University of Manchester, and we looked at offer rates of all applications that were submitted in the 2015 application cycle. We got this data from UCAS, and we looked at it in terms of across a lot of socio-demographic and widening participation factors, but the one that I will focus on in this presentation is school type, so applications that were submitted by those who went to a state school and those who went to an independent school. And as you can see from the first table, the offer rate of applications submitted by those who went to an independent school is 89.1%, and this is significantly higher than the offer rate of applications submitted by those who went to a state school, which is 70.8%. And you can also see that there are differences in the state school category. For instance, state sixth form has the lowest offer rate of 67.2%. We then decided to test how significant this was, and we produced some logistic regression, and that's the second graph next to the table. The red lines indicate that there is a 95% confidence interval, so we can be 95% confident that the offer rate for each one of those falls within that gap. In the next stage of the analysis was to control for predicted grades. So we took all those applications who applied for the School of Physics and Astronomy, who met the predicted grades that were needed to gain an offer. And those were around A star to AA, but that varied depending on the course, and they needed to have an A level in physics and maths. So out of all of those applications that were submitted that met the required grades needed to gain an offer, every single one got an offer. This led me to conclude that it isn't necessarily it is the process that is going on before these applicants make the application that is why they're not getting an offer. And it also led me to consider further research needs to be done. For instance, we need to find out why those from a state school, why more applications from a state school are being submitted and they're submitting their application without those grades that are needed to gain an offer. And this is something the widening participation team at the University of Manchester looked at. So they are going to, these give specific areas for them to target of where exactly they can lead the Manchester Access Programme and things like that. They can target students who go to state schools to see what can be done to get those, what can be done to sort of intervene with them and see how they can get applicants applying for courses where they're going to get those correct, where they're going to meet those predicted grades and where they are going to get an offer. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.